You're on Energy Groove Australia. This is People in Music. My name's Brad, and tonight we are chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia. Music Australia is the peak body for the music industry here in Australia, and throughout this hour we'll be chatting to Chris about his role as CEO and how he got his start in the music industry.
Energy Groove and Music Matters presents People in Music.
Chris, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now tell us, how did you get your start in music? What's the path that you travelled before you started at Music Australia?
Well, I'm what they call a lifer. I've worked in the industry all my life, but interestingly, I didn't actually start in music. I did an arts degree initially in drama, and I worked in multi-arts roles, festivals, art centres, multicultural arts, but soon found music was the art form that resonated most for me. So I'm a bit of an all-rounder. And it didn't take too long for me to realise my talents actually are more on the organising and producing side rather than the creative.
Right.
And so that's where I forged my career.
And how did you find that out, that you were perhaps more suited to that producing side?
It's that point when you're hoping the phone will ring and it doesn't, and you find you're the one who's picking it up. And in fact, what I was doing was picking up the phone to make stuff happen. And at that stage, I wanted to be an actor, so I wanted a creative role, and I'd create activity, and I'd get acting parts, but the acting parts became a smaller part, and I found what I was doing is picking up the phone and calling others. So it's really, I guess, realising at a certain point where your skills best lie, and for me, it was picking up the phone to make stuff happen.
Well, it is a particularly handy skill to have, the skill of making things happen, or at least organising certain things. I find that a lot of people that I know that used to be musicians are now event organisers, and they find that that's something they really enjoy, seeing a big production being put on.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think, that notion of the varied portfolio career is really gaining currency. And certainly I've had one of those, from running art centres to small multi-arts companies, a couple of stints running venues, working in and out of government. And I think the more you've got the ability to vary your skill sets, to vary the work opportunities, the more likely you are to forge a career in the sector. And
do you find that that's probably really good advice for anyone who wants to work in the creative field, is that you have to have your kind of fingers in a lot of pies, if you will?
Yes, that's right. Look, I think multiple skills these days and building those skills is increasingly important. I do feel also that you do benefit if you've got some special skills, something that you really build some depth. So you have breadth and depth in your skill sets. I mean, in my case, I realised that it was management. So, after about 10 years, I took myself off to night school to get an MBA. I really felt I needed solid management skills. So that's, if you like, where I got some specialist capabilities.
And I guess a lot of the work, particularly for creatives, would be project-based. So you're not necessarily always going to be locked into a full-time position?
That's right. In fact, I've had 2 regular jobs in my career where I've done at least 10 different jobs that last for more than a year or 2, and they were both in government. And I ended up giving up both because ultimately the work in the sector that is almost invariably contract-based was more attractive to me.
Okay. This is People in Music on Energy Groove Australia. We're chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia. Coming up next, we'll be chatting to Chris about his day-to-day role as Music Australia CEO. We'll also talk about how Music Australia represents all genres across the music industry and how Chris stays up to date with the issues affecting the industry. Stick around. This is People in Music. You're on Energy Groove Australia. This is People in Music, back for another month on Energy Groove Australia. This is the show where we talk to people who are behind the scenes in the music industry. And tonight we're chatting to Chris Bowen, CEO of Music Australia.
Energy Groove.
Now, you are currently CEO of Music Australia, which is very exciting. What do you do in your day-to-day role as CEO of Music Australia? What do you do when you get into
the day-to-day role is leading the operations of a small not-for-profit peak body. We've got a staff of 4 and an office in Sydney, and we have a network of some 60 counsellors and expert advisory groups based around the country. And we drive a whole national program that's based around information and advocacy and acting as a sort of catalyst or enabling body for the art form.
Okay, now for those who may not be aware, Music Australia, how does it fit into the music industry? Why is it primarily there? Obviously for information and advocacy, but why would musicians need this body?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Well, as our tagline says, we're a voice for all of music, and we're a peak body that works right across the sector. And interestingly, we're the only organisation that does that. So we really aim to be, if you like, Australia's leading music service delivery organisation. And we do work right across from the community sector to the education. We have a big education school music program, and into professional industry, both on the classical and the contemporary side. So in terms of what musicians might want from us, it would be information. We have a rich set of digital information platforms, a journal, newsletter, social media, but also there's opportunities for professional development through our workshops and seminars, and an opportunity to come to the table for engagement when it's time to look at particular ways where we can advance and strengthen the sector.
And how do you manage this? I mean, on a national scale, it must be quite a daunting task to represent, I guess, the industry. How do you trickle that down into a state level?
Well, that's another good question, and really what we do is seek to provide that national overview. So an example would be, if you look at our membership structure, you'll find a lot of the music, in fact most of the music peak bodies are our members. And in each state you find that there's a contemporary music development organisation, Music Victoria, Music New South Wales, Q Music, etc., and they're all great initiatives. They in turn have a peak body called AMEN, the Australian Music Industry Network, and AMEN are members of us.
Okay.
So we work with AMEN, and in turn they work across the network with all of the state bodies. So that's just one example of how we work.
Yeah. And specifically, obviously we're not dealing with genres of music. So for example, you know, if I was a folk musician, would I feel that Music Australia represents me?
Well, we claim and aim to be music genre neutral.
Okay.
Achieving that, of course, is almost impossible because the art form is so diverse. But we value all music and seek to represent people who are involved in all genres. So absolutely there'd be a place for folk musicians alongside every other passionate follower of any genre you get.
Yeah. You must have to have a really broad and rich understanding of Australia's music industry. How do you personally keep up with the issues affecting the industry broadly and at a community level?
Well, we're really fortunate because we've got this fabulous network of experts and professionals. So, you know, if it's copyright, I'll turn to Music Rights Australia. They're the experts in this area and they're one of our members. If it's publishing, I'll turn to AMPAL, which is the publisher's peak body, etc. So we're very lucky to have that network. But I've always been naturally curious personally, and as I mentioned before, I'm a bit of an all-rounder, so I do like to sort of keep myself as much as I can and encourage everyone involved in Music Australia to stay across pretty much the whole of the art form.
Yeah, for sure. And are you a consumer of music yourself quite regularly?
Oh, yes. So I had a stint here in Brisbane running the local multicultural arts centre for a number of years, and out of that came a lifelong love for world music, and that's certainly where my particular passions lie.
Fantastic. This is People in Music on EnergyGroove Australia. We're joined by Chris Bowen tonight, the CEO of Music Australia. Stick around because we'll be chatting to Chris about the necessary education required for employment in the music industry and also some of the issues that are affecting Australian artists in the music industry today. You're on EnergyGroove Australia. This is People in Music. Hit up our website. It's energy-groove.com if you haven't already. And you can also download our app for your smartphone. It's completely free and it's available for iPhone, Android and BlackBerry. You'll be able to listen to Energy Groove Radio wherever you are in the world. This is People in Music, and tonight we're joined by Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia.
For more information, log on to whymusicmatters.org.
We love Music Matters!
Now, if someone wanted to step into your shoes, Chris, what preparation or education would you say is a prerequisite? We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but if someone wanted to jump into your shoes now, what would you suggest is the best path they take?
Well, it's really about skills, knowledge and relationships in our industry, so certainly start with the skills. And there's lots of great courses that you can go to, and I would encourage people to think carefully about the course because it's a big commitment in terms of time and these days in money. But there's some really good music courses out there right across, whether you want to go to a conservatoire to do classical, or to a vocational program for good production skills, or if you want a broader music education degree. So get those skills, and I'd also always encourage people, while they're getting those skills, get as much skills development that you generate yourself as you can. Anything from sort of building your social media skills through to understanding, just through lots of reading and lots of hanging out with the sector, just to gain as much understanding of how the sector works as you can.
Yeah, I find.
And then it moves to knowledge, and that's just over time. Just, as I mentioned before, get some specialist skill and you'll build your knowledge around that. So being curious really helps. Read, seek out. The digital world's fabulous. You can follow people who are thought leaders and you can learn from them. You can attend conferences and courses. And then it comes to relationships, which is probably in the music industry as vital, if not the most vital component.
Yeah, any creative industry I find is relationships or networking is a big part of it. And actually actively going out and putting yourself out there so people, introduce yourself and start a conversation with you. I find that's quite important.
Yes, it's interesting. I think the contemporary music business more than anything is very built on relationships. It's also built on good, solid behaviours, always acting honourably, being consistent, building a peer group early in your career and sustaining and maintaining that over time so you've got trusted allies and colleagues as you progress through your career. But the contemporary music industry is a bit curious like that. It really is built on solid relationships. And I think a lot of it is because it's built on trust.
That's right. Now, what challenges are you seeing the music industry in Australia facing currently?
Well, we face all sorts of challenges, and a lot of it is through the digital age, which has disrupted so many industries, and ours has not been excused. And so really we've found that the industry to a degree has been turned on its head. And so to right it, there's some really quite sort of character building challenges, if we're honest. Principally around those, it's just getting good copyright frameworks in place so that musicians and music creators can be appropriately remunerated for their work. Rolling back pressure on live music. There's multiple pressures on live music, and nourishing that sector, which is really important part of the sector. Encouraging people to value and respect music so that they're prepared to pay for going and seeing a gig on a Friday night. Otherwise, I find it curious that people are prepared to pay for a cocktail but not for a live music gig. And
isn't that interesting?
And also paying for the recorded music that you consume. And then the bigger challenge, I guess, is being more of a exporter of cultural goods. We're actually a net importer. And that's fantastic. We love, and there's some great music from overseas that we want to consume, but there is a challenge and indeed an opportunity to consume more of our own and export more of our own music.
And can you elaborate a bit more about what you mean on exporting our own music? Promoting artists overseas, or...?
Yeah, sure. Well, it happens at home and it happens overseas. So, the good news, there's some great opportunities attached to each of these challenges, and the good news is that we actually love our own music. There's just huge numbers of attendances. I think something like 8 million attendances at live music each year, and a big chunk of those will be our own music. Unfortunately, those figures are dropping a bit, so there's work to do to get them back. But, we're out there and we love our music, so every time we see an Australian band or go to a concert that's got Australian content, then we're supporting our own content. We love our own recorded music too. I think the last time I had a look at the ARIA charts, just over a third, well over a third of the albums sold in Australia are Australian, and that's an increase. Now, in terms of improving or increasing our cultural content, if more of the live gigs we went to were Australians and more of the albums we bought were Australian music, then that would do what's known as improve our terms of trade. Right. Make us more of a consumer and producer of great Australian music at home. From an overseas point of view, it's turning... we've got this amazing crop of artists just really striking out internationally. The number of international top ones that we've had in the last couple of years is staggering. So the creative potential is there. The challenge is to turn that into sufficient sales and revenues that our music exports becomes a more solid contributor to the national economy.
This is People in Music on EnergyGroove Australia, chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia tonight. Stick around because apparently local music being sold in Australia is up and live music attendance is down. We'll find out why very soon on EnergyGroove Australia. You're on EnergyGroove Australia. This is People in Music. My name's Brad. It's a pleasure having your company. Tonight we're chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia. People in Music, if you're not aware, as part of the Music Matters campaign, check out more info on that on the website whymusicmatters.org, and you'll be able to hear interviews from previous guests as well.
EnergyGroove.
You mentioned an increase in recorded music sold being Australian in Australia. Why do you think that is?
Well, again, we've got great music. For some reason that I've never really understood. In my own home state, I've always marvelled at the extraordinary talent that comes out of Brisbane, which, as many people would know, is an indie scene. But I think there is a love for the indie music. There's also been some great music education. We've really got some very dynamic music businesses that are putting artists through some really important development and support pathways. And the industry is becoming a lot more joined up. It's a very professional, collegial, quite engaged entrepreneurial group of businesses like platforms for these artists to build their careers. But at the end of the day, it comes down to great songs and great talent, and we've got no shortage of those.
Now, you also mentioned that in the last year, live music attendance has dropped a little bit.
That's right.
Why do we see a drop in that?
I guess there's two sides to it. One is that there's multiple pressures on live music, and a lot of those are regulatory, and through gentrification, venues come under noise pressures, the commercial pressures that have acted upon venues in many years. We've seen trends where it started with large screen televisions through to poker machines, a lot of stuff around the social issues of live music districts, putting pressure with regulatory reform to achieve the regulatory rules that bear down on venues. So the work of the Live Music Office is really important. It's a national office that's spearheading, basically seeking to roll back these pressures. And there's some tremendous results happening in cities all around the country, so it's very promising. So fixing regulatory issues is a big part of it. But the other is actually stimulating the sector. As I said before, once upon a time you could go and see, in any inner city area, there might be a dozen or up to 20 places within a couple of k's that you could go and see live music. For the reasons I've just mentioned before, there isn't the same number now. But also, people have got out of the habit of paying to go and see it, and so it's actually hard to make it add up economically. So we're really keen to encourage people to value music and to really think that a night out seeing a live band can be something that offers them a hugely rewarding experience, as well as contributing to a viable live music sector.
Yeah, and what would you say to venues who are perhaps considering putting on live music, who may, not necessarily see that as a really important thing to contribute to the community and their venue's brand?
Look, I think now is as good, if not as the best time that we've had for many years, because of this great work that's happening, and the cities too now are starting to realise that it makes a difference. We're seeing the rise of the music cities that are positioning themselves, like Melbourne likes to position itself as the live music capital of Australia. But you'll find in the smaller capitals too there's some great initiatives. Brisbane has an extraordinary live music scene in the inner city Fortitude Valley area, which has naturally always been there, but has been supported by some really positive regulatory frameworks. South Australia now has a contemporary music development office that's pushing to strengthen the live music sector. So there's lots of reasons to be really optimistic. So if I was a venue manager, I'd be encouraging them to get involved and capitalise on those opportunities that are happening in that sort of broader external environment, but also do it because it actually is a really special thing to do. The idea to actually be responsible for providing a space in which creativity can flourish, in which bands can cut their teeth and build their skills, and where you can seek out and find new talent, particularly stuff that may go on to be, and many of it will go on to be really quite famous. It's a pretty special business to be in.
You're on EnergyGroove Australia. This is People in Music. We're chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia. Stick around because coming up next, we'll chat to Chris about how important music is in his life, and we'll also chat about the cultural mentality of piracy. You're on EnergyGroove Australia. You're hanging out with Brad on People in Music this evening. We're chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia. Hit up their website for more information about them. It's musicaustralia.org.au.
People in Music on EnergyGroove.
Now, we're of course talking about, or we're talking because of the Music Matters campaign, which is really about reinforcing the importance of music and just reminding people, you know, what a big part music plays in their lives. Why do you think campaigns such as this are important to the music industry?
Look, it's a brilliant campaign and it's really important, and fundamentally it's because I would argue that music is intrinsically good. Richard Gill, the composer, always beats that drum and says, we support music. Music matters because it's good. It's a fundamental part of our identity and our culture and our lives, and it's with us from beginning to end. So music matters simply because it intrinsically moves us and is very special. But campaigns like this are important because, for some of the reasons I've already outlined, music is actually under quite a bit of pressure. To get it for free age doesn't make it any easier. And we don't want the arts to lose the vital place that they've actually always played in our culture, in our identity. And so it matters that we respect our artists, it matters that we respect all of the creatives, and that we value the live and recorded music experience, and that we celebrate the extraordinary work of our artists and composers.
I think a lot of people these days, I guess with such a easy access to music, it's easier to forget how many people are actually involved in putting on live performances and producing recorded music as well.
That's exactly right. And a lot of those too are relying on a percentage of what is paid when you commit to buying an album or a track or a live music gig experience. And it's a huge employment multiplier. And as someone once said, there's limited productivity improvements you can have in live music because in classical music it still takes a symphony orchestra to play a symphony, it still takes a quartet to play a quartet, and it still takes a band to play a band's work of repertoire. And the knock-on employment that is generated is quite extraordinary in the sector.
Now, have you seen that shift, though? Is there a bit of a cultural mentality shift that's happened since, this whole, MP3s and everything have come into the music industry? Have you seen a change in mindset of consumers towards music?
Well, I don't think that music is loved any less than it ever was. And in fact, the arts participation statistics that are being put out show that there's more people making more music than ever before. I think after visual arts, it's the art form that people most engage in some way in their lives. So it's a huge part of people's lives. The real difference, of course, which is fantastic, is that in the do-it-yourself world that's been facilitated through digital change, anyone can be a musician, and there's no barriers stopping anyone in pursuing a dream to be a musician. So there's more music being made than ever before. It does make it hard for those small numbers of people who want to and do forge professional careers, for those to be viable and sustainable over time.
And how do you see that moving forward in terms of actually allowing people to build professional careers and actually earn a living from their music? Do you see that being possible in the future?
Look, I'm an optimist, and I do, yes. But the reality is that, a very good economist called David Throsby did a study a few years ago that showed the average musician earns about $10,000 a year from their creative work. Okay. And that's
pretty good.
A pretty small amount. And that's despite years of learning, lots of practice, lots of hard work applying their art and their craft. So we've always said if we value those highly skilled professionals, then we will continue to have them. But we can't take them for granted, because if we don't support them, effectively what happens is we lose them from the sector, or they have to leave to go and work elsewhere. And for us, that's often leaving our big city, our small country towns and moving to our big cities, or leaving our cities and moving overseas. So I do have optimism, and I think what we're seeing is a shift now where the digital world is starting to stabilise. We're starting to see how it might actually be sustainable. And there's lots of different places that artists can earn income, but once upon a time they'd earn it from a couple of sources. Now they earn it from multiple. And if you're savvy, there is a viable professional life to be had for musicians because people do love music and they are still prepared to commit time and money to it.
We're chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia, on People in Music this evening. After the break, we'll be chatting about the international contribution to deter piracy. If you'd like more information on People in Music, hit up whymusicmatters.org. You're on EnergyGroove Australia. This is People in Music, and tonight we're joined by Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia.
EnergyGroove.
In Australia, do you see any differences? So when you're looking at it from the Music Australia perspective, do you look overseas and see any other bodies overseas doing anything differently to cultivate this?
Yes, we do. And it's always great to learn from our colleagues overseas. And one of the great things, of course, is we've now got a fantastic music export office called Sounds Australia, which has provided a brilliant platform for all sorts of people to get out there and engage overseas. And what I always enjoy is seeing how much our professionals take advantage of those opportunities, whether it be markets in the UK, Europe, US, etc. And each time you do that, you learn and bring stuff back. And, for example, there's a live music task force now, which Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, has convened, and they're really looking at the challenges that they as a capital city face. Now, I was really surprised to hear that. I thought London's having a problem with live music. It's the capital of it, pretty much.
Yeah.
So in some ways we can learn what they're doing well, but in others we actually learn that we're doing pretty well. And the general consensus now is that colleagues coming back from overseas are saying we're right up there in terms of imaginative solutions to some of the challenges of our industry.
Well, that must be really reaffirming. That must be really good to hear.
It is, and I had the good fortune when I was over at a conference earlier this year to talk with the chair of Boris Johnson's task force, who just said that he'd actually had to completely change his thinking after listening to a couple of Australian speakers at the conference, because he was so impressed with how innovative the approaches being taken here are.
There you go. Do you think why do you think we're so innovative? Is it our
part
isolation
of it is necessity? I've always felt that if you live in a small place and you've got a distant population, you really do need to be inventive if you want to do what you do well. And we don't have large numbers in any one area, so we tend to cross-fertilise through necessity. And out of that, I think, comes inventiveness. Plus, there's a sort of natural creative streak that runs through the Australian character, which has always been part of our life.
You're on EnergyGroove Australia. This is People in Music, and we're chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia tonight. Stick around, because after the break, we'll be chatting about how Taylor Swift is sticking up for all artists and the rights for their music. And we'll also be chatting to Chris about the need for consumer education when it comes to accessing music digitally. You're on EnergyGroove Australia. This is People in Music. We're chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia this month.
For more information, log on to whymusicmatters.org.
We love Music Matters!
Now, if we steer back a little bit towards, I guess, the Music Matters campaign, what would you say to those who frequently download music illegally, or perhaps don't quite see the value in paying for music?
Well, quite simply, I'd say think about what you've done from an artist's point of view. Importantly, what you've done is you've actually not to choose whether they want music to be used in the way you use it. And really what most of this is about is giving the artist the right to say and to choose when, where and how their music is used. The other thing you've done, of course, is denied a professional the opportunity to actually derive some income from the hard work that's actually created that music. And as Taylor Swift has now rather famously said in the last week or so, in directing some comments to Apple Music, "Dear Mr. Apple, we wouldn't ask for your iPhones for free. Please don't ask for our music for free."
I find that's a really good point, actually. I do appreciate what she's actually doing in terms of standing up for her own music and value as an artist.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I would agree with that. And the stand she's taken has been welcomed by artist advocates. And really it now is, I think, and it's a bit easier for her to do because she's signed to an indie label. So it's a very complex world too, and there's some very, very sort of deep and to a degree understandable label relationships that sit behind this, and it's not going to change quickly. But I think the more artists who take a stand and to advocate and to build support from their fans, so the fans understand the issues and start to support it, the sooner we'll start to address this issue.
Yeah, certainly. And I think there should be more education, actually, to the consumer about these, I guess, relationships between artists and, labels and service providers and all of that, just so that we can actually understand, how important it is to support the music in the right way.
Look, that's right. And it's made a bit difficult too because some of the decisions and choices that have been made by the sector in the past. But the reality now is that it's really clear that as a consumer you have certain rights, but also as a consumer one has certain responsibilities. And I think the education can point out that the responsibilities do involve a respect and placing a value on a particular item that you might want to consume or you might want to acquire. And the value that's asked and the amount that's required to be paid is not great for the pleasure and for the enrichment that it offers, in our view.
We're joined by Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia, on People in Music this evening. We're coming towards the end of the program, but stick around because we'll chat to Chris about what his favourite music is at the moment and what his favourite gig was as well. So we'll chat to him about that very shortly. Stick around. You're on EnergyGroove Australia. This is People in Music. We're chatting to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia.
EnergyGroove and Music Matters presents People in Music.
Now, let's get into the fun stuff. Tell me a little bit about your favourite music at the moment.
Well, as I mentioned before, I love music outside the Western tradition, and we're a nation of immigrants in Australia, so there's a wealth of music right on our doorstep that comes from all sorts of different cultures. And whether it's the oud player Joseph Tawadros, who's Egyptian heritage but Australian-based, who's world class, or the Tatar singer Zulia. A particular artist who's from up here, Tenzin Chogyal, is great. He's a Tibetan expatriate artist and a great advocate for Tibetan people in Australia.
Okay.
Or the indigenous star Gurumul up in the Northern Territory, who's completely blitzed overseas and shown a whole new indigenous face internationally for our music. So for me, if you're looking to find me on a Friday night gig, I'll be out there amongst that sort of music.
And do you find that if you're someone who is really into world music, do you find that there's a lot there to actually, go out and regularly go out and consume?
It's a little bit harder to find, and although we're a very multicultural country, we're a small country, so you don't find the quantity of gigs and festivals in that area. But yes, you can, and if you're lucky enough to live in one of the larger cities, it's unlikely there wouldn't be a place to see music like that each week. Yeah. And of course, we have some wonderful festivals. But increasingly, you'll find that the mainstream festivals will have really good examples of this sort of music. And you can go to Blues Fest in Byron Bay and see it. Woodford and a whole bunch of the folk festivals have it. And of course, we have one of the best world music festivals in the world each March in Adelaide at the Womadelaide Festival.
That's a good point. I actually have a few Womadelaide CDs.
There you go.
There you go. What's your favourite gig experience? Is there anything over your time in the music industry that stood out to you as gosh, that was a good gig?
There was a night, and it was at Womadelaide, under the stars, with sort of 10,000 other people, totally spellbound, as we watched what turned out to be the last gig in Australia of the late, great Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. So for the specialists, he was the most revered of the Pakistani mystical Sufi singers. That's the sort of branch of Islam which has an extraordinary culture and an extraordinary richness to it. So seeing Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan under the stars at Womadelaide was pretty special.
Sounds brilliant. Glass of wine in your hand, that'd be great.
Indeed.
Now, I think I already know the answer to this question, but how much do you love music?
Well, for me, music's the reason why I get out of bed each day. I've devoted my whole life to working with musicians and supporting them and finding ways to help foster their creative space. So it's very hard for me to go an hour or even less sometimes without music in my day.
So it's your life force, Chris.
That's right.
Now, Chris, we're almost out of time, but before we go, tell me about your favourite gig experience.
I remember going to the Dreaming Festival, which was a wonderful, intimate Indigenous music festival held on the same grounds as the Woodford Folk Festival an hour north of Brisbane a few years ago. And word had spread that there was this new young rising star in the Indigenous circuit, but he didn't have a profile at the time. And I went to this venue, and it was about three-quarters full, but it soon became packed as Gurrumul Yunupingu came on stage. And here's this singer blind from birth who plays the guitar strung, he's left-handed, he plays the guitar strung the wrong way because no one thought that he was going to amount to enough to actually string it the other way for a left-hander. And there was something about this ethereal voice that just went to the core of everyone who saw him. And of course he's now one of our greatest stars, not only Indigenous stars but Australian stars, and has represented us internationally on many occasions. He's a pretty special man, and I can't think of a better ambassador for Australian Indigenous music and Australian music generally.
All right, I appreciate your time, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No trouble at all.
You're on Energy Groove Australia. This has been People in Music. That's about all the time we have for you this evening. A big thank you to Chris Bowen, the CEO of Music Australia, for joining us tonight. Hit up their website if you'd like to follow up on anything about Music Australia or anything that Chris has talked about. Their website is musicaustralia.org.au, and you'll find a link there on our Facebook page too. Just search for Energy Groove Australia in your little search bar. If you've missed tonight's episode of People in Music, you will be able to catch up on their website. It's whymusicmatters.org, and you'll be able to find all the information about the show, previous episodes, plus you'll be able to learn all about the Music Matters campaign. I'm going to leave you with a track picked by our very special guest, Chris Bowen, on People in Music tonight. This is a track from Gurrumul Yunupingu's self-titled album, and this one is Wiatu. It's been a pleasure having your company. Until next month, enjoy the music.